interacting with Karen Reed and John O'Keefe throughout that evening, correct?
I remember having conversations with John that evening. I don't necessarily remember speaking to Karen that evening.
Irrespective of whether or not you spoke to her, you obviously saw her there.
Yes.
You were there with her for a couple of hours.
Well, I wasn't there with her for a few hours. I was there with other people.
Okay. So without splitting hairs, she was there, correct?
Yes.
John was there.
Yes.
You were socializing with John.
Yes.
She was right next to him.
Sometimes, perhaps not, maybe all the times I was talking to him, no.
So you were socializing not exclusively with her.
Right.
Certainly socializing with her 6 days before John O'Keefe ended up dead on your lawn, correct?
We were there at the same time, yes.
And yet, when you were asked 3 months later, do you know Karen Reed, or how do you know Karen Reed? The actual question was, so the female you've never met before. Is that fair to say? That was Mr. Lowry's question. And your immediate response was, no, I've never met her or seen her before. Correct? That's what you said.
That's not my whole response, no.
That's what you said immediately upon that question, sir.
That's the beginning of my response, yes.
That was the first sentence out of your mouth.
Yes.
You also testified at the subsequent grand jury in June of 2023. When asked what was your impression of Miss Reed, you said, quote, I honestly didn't really have one. I didn't have any conversation with her. I just kind of saw her from across the table. I didn't really think of it either way. Correct?
I don't know what that question is referring to. Is that for the waterfall or is that for Hillside?
Hillside.
Okay, yes.
All right. So in June of 23, a little over a year later, your testimony significantly changed from no, I've never met or seen her before, to I really didn't have a conversation with her. I saw her across the table. I didn't really think of it either way. Correct?
No, I think those are very similar testimonies.
When you were asked in the other proceeding, and this is about the waterfall, question, did you talk to Karen Reed at the waterfall that night? You answered unequivocally, I did not. Is that right?
Yes.
And that's what you told the June grand jury, June of 23, correct?
Are you referring to the state grand jury? Or?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay.
That's why I'm using dates. I'm trying to be careful.
Right.
April.
I'm just not clear on what all the dates were.
I'll see if I can clarify.
Okay.
April 2022, state grand jury. June of 2023, a different grand jury.
Okay.
Okay. When you were asked at the June of 2023 grand jury, did you ever talk with Karen Reed at the waterfall that night? Your answer was, I did not. Correct?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. With the court's permission, could I play a small clip from Exhibit 53?
Okay.
Starting at timestamp 11:53 and 15 seconds. If we could just play this, and I would direct your attention, sir, to the upper right-hand corner. Pause it. Do you recognize the individuals in this clip?
Yes.
Do you recognize that person?
Yes, I believe that's me.
Do you recognize that person?
I do. I believe that's the defendant.
Ms. Reed,
Yes.
what does it appear you are doing as it relates to Ms. Reed in this clip?
It appears that I'm talking at the table. I don't know if it's specifically to her, but
So, did you see the part of the clip starting at 11:53 and 15 seconds, going back about 30 seconds?
yes.
Who did it appear you were talking directly to, and who did it appear was answering directly to you?
I looked like I was speaking, but I can't say for sure that I was directly talking to the defendant.
Even though it looked like you were looking right at her and leaning toward her as she's answering you.
I was definitely looking that way. I don't remember the conversation.
The reality is, we can take that down. The reality is, Mr. Albert, you had many conversations with her throughout the night, like you would with anybody else you were socializing with, correct?
No.
It's not like you ignored her through that evening.
No, I think that just the positioning of me on the other side of the table, I didn't have really much contact.
There was only one person between you, and that was Mr. Higgins.
No, I don't think that was the setup for the whole night.
I didn't say the whole thing.
Right.
I was talking about right then.
Right,
That's an example.
right, what's your question? Rephrase your question, please.
Did you or did you not have conversations with Karen Reed that night?
I do not recall having conversations with Karen Reed that night at all, no.
And that's what you told the grand jury under oath, notwithstanding this video evidence to the contrary.
Yes, I don't think that video shows that.
I'm going to let that stand. Next question, please.
So Brian also continued to talk, and he explained that he also did not tell Officer Link that Katelynn Albert, his nephew, that he was at the house that night when he got home. So both him and his wife have both chose not to tell Officer Link that Katelynn was one of the individuals at the house. I'm not quite sure why you would exclude somebody who was at the house that night, even if they were there just for a certain amount of time. And so when he was questioned or asked questions about Officer Link's first interview that morning, he said he wouldn't consider the conversation with Officer Link to be an interview that morning when the others were in the house. However, Officer Link did write a report based off of that conversation or that interview. In his report, Officer Link put that they told him Katelynn Albert, their daughter, had left at 12:15 a.m. However, Brian on the stand said she didn't leave until 2 o'clock or around 1:45 a.m. and that Officer Link's report must be wrong. So there's some more discrepancy of times and who was at the house and when. And this to me becomes a problem because, well, first we already have the fact that they didn't tell them that the nephew was there. So that's one person excluded from the location. And then we have Officer Link writing down information when talking to the group of people saying that Katelynn Albert left at 12:15, yet she left at 2 o'clock or 1:45. Who knows when she actually left. And he also said that Chloe, the dog, who was a German Shepherd, was rehomed after she bit the two women who got sent to the hospital. And he also, through cross-examination from defense, also said that he was aware that there was talk that some of John's injuries were looking like dog bites. And it was after that that they rehomed Chloe, the German Shepherd. Continuing through the cross-examination, we also learned that the basement in that home was used as a weight room, according to Brian, and that the reason why the flooring removed was because of a leaky toilet that ruined it. I would guess we'll find more about why that was relevant later on in the trial. We also learned that Brian's parents built that house in the 1970s, and Brian Albert sold the house in 2022, which is right after this incident took place. So they actually were in that home for over 50 years and then sold it right after this incident took place. He also states that the reason why he sold it was because the children were grown up and they didn't need a house that large anymore, but I'm pretty sure one of the children still lived there. He also said that they had contacted a realtor like the year prior, and then it wasn't until at that point that they decided to sell it, or actually sold it. So Mr. Jackson, who is one of the attorneys on the defense side, he read an official letter or official motion into the record. It was a letter from the Commonwealth that was sent to Brian Albert that was a motion filed by defense to make sure that all of their cell phones that they used at that time were not deleted, destroyed, or altered in any way. And so the letter specified that the phones were not, any phones that were used between January of 2022 through February 28th, 2022, that those were to be preserved. Or this letter was sent to him on September 23rd. However, Brian says he didn't receive the letter, but this is an official letter sent through the U.S. mail, so there is tracking on it, and or probably even signatures. I'm not 100% on that. Signatures that you've received the letter. So Brian actually got rid of his phone on September 22nd, so the day before this notice would have been received by him. He said the reason why he got rid of his phone was because his birthday was September 4th, and that his phone was broken and not working too well, and so he got a new phone. And he also said that it just happened to be a coincidence that he got rid of it the day before this letter was supposedly sent to him. And so I say supposedly because he says he didn't receive it. Now, Brian also said he was on a conference call with several people, so that being Steve Nelson, the Commonwealth, Mr. Lowry, who we've been seeing through the trial, prosecution, and other witnesses such as Brian Higgins, Jennifer McKay, and Matt McKay. However, Brian was not the one to initiate this call, so he didn't call to prosecution to tell him that he got rid of his phone. He was just on this call with all of these people, and he said from what he remembers about that call was that Mr. Lowry said the defense filed a motion to ask that all phones be preserved. Mr. Jackson asked him at this point, did you tell or inform Mr. Lowry that you had actually got rid of your phone the day before? And he said, no, I didn't inform him of that. And Mr. Jackson said, why not? And he said, because Mr. Lowry didn't ask me. And so it was during this phone call that he was informed that he wasn't supposed to alter or destroy any of the data or the phone itself that was used during that time period. And Mr. Jackson asked him, did you tell Mr. Lowry that you got rid of the phone? And he said, no, I didn't. He said, you didn't ask him, or you didn't tell him, even though you were on a conference call with Mr. Lowry, who was reading you guys a letter from the judge telling you guys you can't be destroying or altering this phone, any of these phones. And he said, yeah, I didn't say anything because Mr. Lowry didn't ask me that. Continues to ask him questions about what does he think happens with the process once you exchange your phone or upgrade your phone. What happens to the old phone? And they tried to ask him questions like, is the data that's in the phone destroyed? And Mr. Albert says he doesn't know. And they asked that several different ways to try to get him to, I guess, admit that yes, he knows the data is going to be destroyed when you exchange your phone. But he continued to say he doesn't know what happens to the data once your phone is traded in. This testimony, I haven't stated much of my opinion through these reviews, but this testimony has had me laughing multiple times because the answers that Brian Albert were giving were just so silly, and you could tell, like anybody in their right mind could tell, that he was just avoiding the questions by just denying and lying and acting like he doesn't know this information.
At another proceeding, under oath, in relation to a conversation that you had with Brian Higgins about your phone. Quote, I don't recall saying I was going to get rid of my personal phone to Brian Higgins. I may have said that, there's personal stuff on my phone, but I don't recall saying that to him, but I don't know. We had multiple conversations about things. Remember saying that under oath at another hearing?
Yes.
You literally admitted at that hearing there's personal, private data on that phone. Hence, you got rid of it. Right?
No.
You certainly wouldn't allow some kid at the AT&T store to have your personal, private data. You're a cop.
No, I assume he doesn't have it
Why would you assume that?
because he took the phone and has it.
And what do you think happens to the data on the phone, sir? Let's just use common sense. What do you honestly think happens to the data on the phone when you turn it in and upgrade your phone?
I'm sure that the data's not there anymore. I'm sure.
It's destroyed, sir. Correct?
I don't know that for a fact. I know that some things are transferred back to the new phone.
You just said, the data is not there.
Some data, I guess, isn't. Yes.
So, I mean, it was just continued questions like that, like over and over again. That was just like hilarious to me because you can tell, you know damn well what happens to your data when you get rid of your phone, right? You don't go get a used phone and then there's information there from the previous owner. It is reset to factory settings. The end. Like, that information is gone. There's no recovering it. They moved on to ask other questions about Brian Albert's experience with defense, as in self-defense. And he did say he had training, through questioning, he did say he had training from being a Marine for 4 years. And that he also had training because he's an officer, right? So he had to have training there. And that he was also a boxer who was featured on a show on TV at one point in his life. And through that questioning, I found it hilarious again because Miss Beverly, we know this judge, how she loves to agree with prosecution. I guess at some point Mr. Lowry or something was not paying attention to some of the questions, which is pretty crazy because he's usually objecting to everything, right? He must have just like happened to daze out or something, but he didn't object to one of the questions defense had asked. And Miss Beverly herself, the judge, objected to the question. Objected and said, you object to that, right? And Mr. Lowry said, yes. So she's objecting for prosecution. Like, how insane is that? Like, I've never seen that in my life. I don't even know if that's legal. Is it legal? Attorneys out there? I don't know. But so far I have not seen her object for defense. So again, shows some leaning towards prosecution in this instance. So Mr. Jackson also plays some more footage of them being at the bar that night, and so let's take a look at that.
You see what you just did?
Yes.
What did you do when you slapped his right arm?
What did I do?
What did you do? What are you doing?
It looks like I'm just being silly, fooling around.
Okay. I'm going to ask you for a little bit more physical description. What are you doing? Why are you grabbing him from the arm?
I don't really know.
Is that a wrestling hold?
No,
Is
I
that
don't
a
think.
control hold?
No, I don't think so.
Is that some sort of control hold that you've used in the past?
Bear hugging somebody? No. That's just a silly fooling around with my buddy.
I think it's hilarious, absolutely hilarious, that Mr. Albert described that move as air hugging. Last time I checked, when you're air hugging, you aren't touching someone. So if you're air hugging, you're doing this. You're not touching each other. And besides that, like, clearly that is not air hugging. It was a move. It was a fight move. The way he's responding or answering these questions is just like, it's so silly, and you can tell he's evading answering the questions. So at 2:22 a.m., through Brian Albert's phone call log, it shows that he called Brian Higgins at 2:22 a.m. and that call lasted for 1 second, and then there was a call back from Brian Higgins to Brian Albert's phone, and that call lasted for 22 seconds. However, Brian Albert maintains that he has no idea who made those calls or answered those calls. He said that at this time he was being intimate with his wife, and so he thinks that his phone he inadvertently called Brian Higgins, and that it was like a butt dial. However, in a hearing in June of 2022, he admitted that the only way to answer a call is by swiping it. But as of now, in this hearing, he's saying that he doesn't know how it got answered. And in that hearing also in June of 2022, he said that it was possible that he talked to Mr. Higgins, but in this hearing, he said he doesn't remember even saying that in that hearing before. However, these statements are being read from the court records, and I don't know why, but Judge Beverly said, let's move on. So to me, it sounds like maybe it was a lie back then, maybe it's a lie now, and that's why we're getting conflicting testimony on the same question. And so that morning, The first call that Brian Albert actually admits to making was to Brian Higgins at 7:20 a.m. And he said he called him to inform him of what had taken place, or what was taking place that morning there at the house with John O'Keefe.
You were asking questions about going over to Ms. McCabe's house later on in the afternoon, 29th, correct?
Yes.
Why did you go over there?
I went to Jen's house because she's my sister-in-law. She was going through an awful time that morning, as we all were. And I wanted to be there to comfort her if she needed anything. Because we're so close, I didn't want her to feel like this was too much for her to handle.
That particular statement doesn't sit with me right. I wanted to make sure this wasn't too much for her to handle. Is a very strange statement to make. And the reason why this particular situation is being referenced here is because he was over at Jennifer McCabe's house when the police were interviewing her and her husband. And so they were asking him, like, why were you over at her house? Did you know that the police were going to be headed over there that particular day to question her? And Brian Albert gave this statement. And I just think that is the strangest thing to say. Now, I'm probably going to have a bunch of people being cruel and make these comments to me, but I don't really care about your comments other than that is a strange thing to say. And what bothers me even more is that there was no other questions asked in reference to what do you mean this was too much for her to handle? Like, she wasn't there when the crime took place, right? She was there with Karen that morning trying to, deal with the ambulance and John being on the floor. But what did he mean by, I didn't want her to think this was too much for her to handle? That to me is a strange comment, and I feel like there's more to that. What bothers me the most is that nobody questioned any of that, including defense, when they re-cross-examined him. I hate to say this, but that makes me feel like she either was brought to be involved in the cover-up of John's murder, or that she was there at the time John was murdered. And next on the stand is Brian Albert Jr. Albert, the only thing that really stood out with his testimony is he said that at one point in the night he had looked out the window in which one of his cousins went outside to see her brother, and at that time that he looked out the window he noticed a black SUV out in front of his yard, and that at another time when he looked out the window again, that black SUV had moved. He could tell that it had moved because there were tracks in the snow from where it had moved up to. At one point he had said that that was Karen Reed's vehicle, but he didn't know it at the time. And defense asked him if he was able to, since he was able to see the tire tracks from the movement of that vehicle, was he able to see 200 plus size man laying on the ground? And he said no, he didn't see anybody laying on the ground. At one point in his testimony, defense had asked him, did he look out the window that morning when there were all sorts of emergency vehicles out front? And he said no, he didn't look out the window because looking out the window gives him anxiety. Now, I'm not quite sure what that was about, and no one really asked him any more to that, or why he was able to look out the window that night and see that black SUV move forward, or that he looked out the window 2 times, and why that didn't give him anxiety, but looking out the window in the morning when all these emergency vehicles were out there would have gave him anxiety. No one questioned him on that, so I'm not quite sure. That was a really strange response that just wasn't questioned. Everything else lined up pretty exact to his parents and other people's testimony of like the order of events that took place at the house, of like who got home first, who the mother left to the bar with, who came home, who went to the house, who was at the house. So that was all that stuck out to me. So the next person on the stand is Katelynn Albert, and this is Brian and Nicole Albert's daughter. So we learned in parents' testimony that she was one of the people that was at the waterfall with her parents and the others, and that also went back to that house. And we also learned through previous testimony that Nicole Albert, her mother, said that Katelynn had left the house at about 2 o'clock, 1:45, to go back home. She's been questioned a little about her relationship with Miss McLaughlin. She was one of the first responders who actually was friends with Katelynn, and they've known each other since high school. But when Miss McLaughlin gave testimony, she was very evasive. With her answers, she was like saying that she really didn't know Katelynn Albert, but there were pictures of them together at different places. That's kind of where we're at right now. However, this is the end of day 10. Finally, this was such long testimony. Sorry it took me so long to get this video up, but I have been working on it every day. So we will continue with Katelynn Albert's testimony tomorrow.